The sound of breaking glass cut through the din of the restaurant like a knife. I winced, knowing exactly what would follow. "Sophia, that's the third time this week!" Mr. Kaplan's voice boomed from behind the bar, his face flushed with anger. "That's coming out of your paycheck." "I'm sorry," I mumbled, kneeling to clean up the shattered remnants of what had been a crystal tumbler. My hands trembled as I carefully picked up the larger pieces, the smaller shards glinting under the dim lighting like tiny daggers. The weight of exhaustion pressed down on my shoulders, making each movement feel like I was wading through molasses. 12 hours into a double shift at the Imperial, the most exclusive restaurant in the city, and I was running on fumes. My feet ached in the mandatory high heels that Mr. Kaplan insisted all female servers wear. The black pencil skirt and crisp white blouse of my uniform clung uncomfortably to my skin, damp with sweat from running back and forth between the kitchen and the dining room all night. "Just be more careful," Mr. Kaplan sighed, his anger deflating as he looked at the dark circles under my eyes. He knew I needed this job more than most. "Take table 7 when you're done. VIPs just came in," I nodded, depositing the glass fragments into the trash before quickly washing my hands. A glance at my reflection in the bathroom mirror made me wince. My dark hair was falling out of its neat bun, and the makeup I'd carefully applied at 6 a.m. was long gone. I did my best to fix myself up, pinching my pale cheeks to bring some color to them before heading back out. The Imperial catered to the city's elite. Old money, new money, politicians, and occasionally, as the staff whispered, people with connections to less legitimate enterprises. I'd learned to be invisible, to serve without being seen, to anticipate needs without intruding. It was exhausting but necessary. The tips from one night here could cover my mother's medication for a week. Table 7 was in the corner of the room, partially hidden behind a decorative column and draped in shadows despite the crystal chandelier overhead. Even before I approached, I could feel something different about this table. The air seemed to thicken, conversations around it hushed as if by some unspoken command. 4 men in impeccable suits occupied the circular booth. 3 of them sat in a way that allowed them to observe the room, their postures alert despite their relaxed expressions. But it was the 4th man who caught my attention, seated in the center of the booth with his back to the wall. He didn't need to watch the room. His men did that for him. He was older than I expected, perhaps in his mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair cropped close to his head. His suit was clearly bespoke, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. No tie, just a crisp white shirt open at the collar, revealing a flash of tanned skin and the glint of a gold chain. But it was his hands that I noticed most. Strong, with long fingers adorned only by a single platinum ring on his right hand. They moved with deliberate grace as he gestured slightly, and immediately one of his companions shifted to make more room. I approached with my professional smile firmly in place. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Imperial. May I start you with drinks?" 3 of the men ordered without looking at me. Whiskey, neat, scotch on the rocks, sparkling water with lime. Standard choices delivered in clipped tones. But when I turned to the man in the center, his eyes locked onto mine for the first time. They were gray, not the soft gray of morning fog, but the hard gray of steel, evaluating and calculating. I felt stripped bare under that gaze, as if he could see past my carefully constructed facade, straight to the desperate woman beneath who was one missed paycheck away from disaster. "Korosho?" he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my chest. "Možno vodku, požaluista. Stolichnuju, bez elda." Russian wasn't uncommon in our city, particularly among certain circles. What was uncommon was finding someone who spoke it as a native. I'd grown up hearing my mother's gentle, lilting Russian at home, learning its cadences and inflections long before I mastered English after our move to America. Without thinking, I responded in kind, my accent perfect from years of practice with my mother. "Konechno, stolichnaya bez eldia, otlichny vibor." The effect was instantaneous. The glass he'd been toying with froze mid-rotation. Those steel-gray eyes widened almost imperceptibly, then narrowed, focusing on me with new intensity. The air around the table seemed to drop several degrees. "Ty govorish po-ruski?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Da, svobodno," I replied, the words flowing naturally. Moja mat iz Moskvy. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His companions exchanged glances, their bodies tensing slightly as if preparing for something. I suddenly realized I'd made a mistake, though I couldn't understand what it was. Speaking Russian had been automatic, a reflex triggered by hearing the familiar language. "Interesting," he said, switching to English. His accent was barely detectable, just a slight hardness to certain consonants. "What's your name?" "Sophia," I answered, fighting the urge to step back from the table. Something in his expression made me feel like prey suddenly noticed by a predator. "Sophia," he repeated, as if tasting the name. "Like wisdom. Fitting." He gestured toward his companions. "Bring our drinks, Sophia. We'll be here for some time." I nodded and retreated to the bar, feeling his eyes follow me across the room. My hands trembled slightly as I relayed the drink orders to the bartender. "Everything okay?" asked Mia, another server, as she collected her own order. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I assured her, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Just tired. Who is that at table 7? They seem important." Mia's eyes widened, and she leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't know. That's Alexei Volkov. They say he runs half the city's imports through the harbor, if you catch my meaning." "Bad news, Sophia. Don't make eye contact. Don't say anything unnecessary. Just serve and disappear. Alexei Volkov." The name sent a chill down my spine. Even I had heard whispers about the Volkov organization, though I tried to keep my head down and stay out of such matters. They controlled much of the city's underworld, gambling, protection rackets, smuggling. And now he was watching me with those calculating eyes, all because I'd answered him in Russian. When I returned with their drinks, I was careful to keep my gaze lowered, placing each glass precisely where it belonged. But as I set the vodka before Volkov, his hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my wrist in a grip that was gentle but unmistakably firm. "Spasibo, Sophia," he said softly. His thumb traced a small circle on the inside of my wrist, just over my pulse point. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. "Pojaluista," I managed to reply, my mouth dry. He released me, but it felt like his touch had branded my skin. I backed away, nearly colliding with another server as I retreated. For the rest of the evening, I felt Volkov's gaze following me around the restaurant. Whenever I glanced toward table 7, those gray eyes were watching, evaluating, considering. I tried to focus on my other tables, on remembering orders and carrying plates, but my mind kept returning to that moment of connection, to the cool touch of his fingers on my skin. As the night wore on, the restaurant began to empty. Mr. Kaplan approached me as I was clearing a recently vacated table. "Sophia, table 7 is asking for you specifically for their dessert order," he said, his expression unreadable. "Whatever you did, they're impressed. The big guy tipped the wine steward $300 for a recommendation." My stomach nodded. "I just spoke Russian with them. It wasn't anything special." Mr. Kaplan raised an eyebrow. "Well, whatever it was, don't screw it up. Customers like that can make or break a place like this." I nodded and made my way back to table 7. The men had finished their meal and were sipping drinks, looking relaxed, yet still, somehow alert. As I approached, their conversation ceased. "Gentlemen," I said, proud that my voice remained steady. "Can I interest you in dessert this evening?" Volkov smiled, a small quirk of his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What would you recommend, Sophia?" The way he said my name made it sound like something precious, something secret shared between us. I swallowed hard. "The chocolate soufflé is excellent," I offered, "though it takes about 15 minutes to prepare." "Then we'll wait," he replied, his gaze never leaving my face, "and coffee for everyone." I nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "Tell me, Sophia," he said, "how long have you worked here?" I hesitated, sensing a trap, though I couldn't identify it. "Almost 2 years, sir. And before that?" "College. I studied literature and languages." Something flickered in his eyes, interest, perhaps, or surprise. "Languages, of course, besides Russian and English?" "French and a little Italian," I admitted, wondering why I was telling him this, why I didn't just excuse myself and run to the kitchen. "A woman of many talents," he observed. Working in a place like this seems below your capabilities. One of his companions shifted uncomfortably, but Volkov silenced him with a glance. The pay is good, I said simply. Not all of us have many choices. Everyone has choices, Sophia, he replied, his tone suggesting he knew exactly what limited choices looked like. Some just have better options than others. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I retreated to put in their dessert order. As I pushed through the kitchen doors, I leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths to steady myself. There was something dangerous about Alexei Volkov, something that went beyond his reputation or his obvious wealth and power. It was the way he looked at me, like I was a puzzle he intended to solve, whether I wanted him to or not. By the time I returned with their soufflés and coffee, the restaurant had nearly emptied. Mr. Kaplan was counting the register, and the kitchen staff was beginning cleanup. Volkov's table was one of only 2 still occupied. I served their desserts with practiced efficiency, trying to maintain professional detachment. But as I placed Volkov's coffee before him, he spoke again, his voice pitched so only I could hear. My driver noticed your car in the employee lot, he said casually. The one with the taped-up rear window and the mismatched front panel doesn't seem very reliable. My blood ran cold. He'd had someone look at my car? What else did he know about me? It gets me where I need to go, I replied, fighting to keep my voice even. And where might that be, I wonder? His gaze was penetrating, searching. Where does Sophia, who speaks perfect Russian and studies literature, go when she leaves this place? I shouldn't tell him. Every instinct screamed against revealing anything personal, and yet I found myself answering. Home to my mother. She's ill. Something softened in his expression. So briefly I might have imagined it. I see. He took a sip of his coffee, grimaced slightly, and set it aside. Well, Sophia, it's been a pleasure. I think we'll be dining here more often. It wasn't a statement. It was a promise. Or a threat. I couldn't decide which. When they finally left, nearly an hour after closing, Volkov was the last to exit the booth. He placed a folded bill on the table. I later discovered it was $1,000, and paused beside me. Du vstrechi, Sophia, he murmured. Until we meet again. I should have been relieved when they left, should have exhaled the breath I'd been holding all evening. Instead, as I watched his broad shoulders disappear through the front door, flanked by his ever-present security, I felt a strange sense of anticipation mingled with my fear. I didn't know it then, standing amidst the empty tables with $1,000 tip in my apron pocket. But that simple exchange in Russian had changed everything. Alexei Volkov had seen me, really seen me, when I had spent years perfecting the art of invisibility. And once a man like him notices you, you never truly disappear again. The next morning dawned gray and dismal, raindrops pattering against my bedroom window like nervous fingers. I'd barely slept, my dreams haunted by steel-gray eyes and the phantom sensation of fingers circling my wrist. Even in sleep, I couldn't escape Alexei Volkov. I dragged myself out of bed at 6 a.m., moving quietly through our small apartment so as not to wake my mother. She needed her rest more than ever these days. The cancer had spread to her bones, leaving her frail and constantly exhausted. Each treatment seemed to take more from her than it gave back, but I couldn't bear the thought of stopping, of giving up what little hope we had. In the kitchen, I made coffee and sorted through the pile of bills that had accumulated on our counter. Electricity, rent, car insurance, and the ever-growing stack of medical statements with their dizzying numbers. The $1,000 tip from Volkov would help, but it was a drop in an ocean of debt that threatened to drown us both. Sofochka, my mother's voice, once strong and vibrant, now whispered from the doorway of her bedroom. You're up early. I turned, forcing a smile. I couldn't sleep. How are you feeling? She shuffled into the kitchen, her once graceful movements now halting and pained. At 52, Irina Petrov looked 20 years older, her body ravaged by disease and treatment. But her eyes, the same deep blue as mine, remained bright with intelligence and warmth. Better today, she lied, lowering herself carefully into a chair at our small table. It was our routine. She would pretend to feel stronger, and I would pretend to believe her. I poured her a cup of tea and set it before her, along with her morning medications. a colorful array of pills that cost more than our rent. I got a good tip last night, I said, trying to sound casual. We can pay off the electric bill and put some toward the hospital. Her thin fingers curled around the mug, seeking its warmth. That's wonderful, Dochenka. Someone must have appreciated your service. I hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. My mother had fled Russia 30 years ago, leaving behind a past she rarely discussed. She'd been married to my father briefly, an American academic she'd met in Moscow, but he'd abandoned us when I was just a baby. We'd made our way alone ever since, my mother working multiple jobs to give me the education and opportunities she never had. A Russian man, I finally said, watching her face carefully. He seemed surprised that I spoke the language. Something flickered in her eyes, a shadow of an emotion I couldn't quite identify. There are many Russians in this city, she said dismissively. Some better than others. Did he give his name? Volkov, I replied. Alexei Volkov. The mug slipped from her fingers, tea splashing across the worn tablecloth. Her face drained of what little color it had. Mama? I reached for her hand, alarmed by her reaction. Do you know him? She recovered quickly, dabbing at the spilled tea with a napkin. Of him, perhaps. The name is familiar from the old country. These men who bring their old ways to new shores. She shook her head. Be careful, Sophia. Such men are dangerous. It was just one night, I assured her, though I recalled Volkov's promise to return. I probably won't see him again. My mother gave me a look that suggested she didn't believe me, but she didn't press the issue. Instead, she changed the subject, asking about my upcoming day. I didn't have a shift at the Imperial until evening, which meant I could take her to her doctor's appointment and still have time to stop by the pharmacy for her prescription refills. The day passed in a blur of sterile waiting rooms, concerned doctors' faces, and the familiar anxiety that accompanied each new test result. By the time I dropped my mother back at home, made her comfortable with books and tea within reach, and headed to work, I was emotionally drained. The encounter with Volkov seemed distant, almost dreamlike compared to the harsh reality of my mother's illness. The Imperial was unusually busy for a Tuesday night. As I changed into my uniform in the staff room, Mia cornered me, her eyes wide with excitement. Did you hear? She whispered, helping me pin my hair into the required neat bun. Mr. Kaplan's been running around like crazy all day. Apparently someone important called and reserved the private dining room for tonight. The chef's been cursing up a storm, preparing some special menu. My stomach tightened. Did they say who? Mia shrugged. Some business types, I think. All I know is Ashley and I are assigned to them. And Mr. Kaplan's been giving us instructions for an hour. No mistakes, best service, blah blah blah. Relief washed over me. Not Volkov then. Just some corporate dinner. I finished changing and headed out to begin my shift, feeling lighter than I had all day. That feeling lasted exactly 43 minutes. I was delivering appetizers to a table of tourists when the restaurant's front door opened. Even with my back turned, I felt the shift in the atmosphere. Conversations dimming. Servers straightening their postures. Mr. Kaplan emerging from his office with an obsequious smile plastered on his face. I didn't need to look to know who had arrived. But I looked anyway. Alexei Volkov stood in the entryway, flanked by the same 3 men from the night before, plus 2 new ones who surveyed the restaurant with practiced efficiency. He wore a different suit tonight, charcoal gray that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his body. His eyes scanned the room until they found me, and then his lips curved into a smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Mr. Kaplan rushed forward, shaking Volkov's hand and gesturing toward the back of the restaurant, presumably to the private dining room. Volkov nodded, saying something that made Kaplan laugh nervously. Then, just before following Kaplan, he gestured toward me with a small incline of his head. Kaplan's eyes widened as he looked between Volkov and me. Then he nodded vigorously and hurried to my side. Sophia, he hissed under his breath. Mr. Volkov has specifically requested that you serve his party in the private room instead of Ashley. What did you do last night? Nothing, I insisted, my mouth suddenly dry. I just spoke Russian with him. Kaplan's eyes narrowed. Well, whatever it was, he's requested you personally. This is a big opportunity for the restaurant, so don't screw it up. Finish with your current tables, then head to the private room, and for God's sake, Be charming. My hands trembled as I delivered the remaining appetizers to my table, nearly dropping a plate of calamari. My mind raced. Why would Volkov request me specifically? What did he want? The memory of his touch on my wrist, that proprietary circle his thumb had traced, made my skin tingle. By the time I approached the private dining room, my heart was hammering against my ribs. I paused outside the heavy wooden door, taking a deep breath to steady myself, then knocked softly. "Enter!" came Volkov's voice from within. I pushed open the door to find a scene far more intimate than I'd expected. Rather than the business dinner Mia had described, there were only 2 place settings at the large table. Volkov sat alone, his security stationed discreetly around the perimeter of the room. Candles cast flickering shadows across the white tablecloth, and a bottle of wine was already open, breathing beside his half-filled glass. "Sophia," he greeted me, rising from his chair with old-world courtesy. "Thank you for joining us. Mr. Volkov," I replied, trying to keep my voice professional despite my confusion. "I understand you requested me as your server this evening." He gestured to the chair across from him. "I requested your company for dinner. Please sit." I froze, glancing uncertainly at the men around the room. Was this some kind of joke, or something worse? "I'm working, Mr. Volkov. I can't just sit down and dine with a customer." "You can if the customer has bought out your services for the evening," he replied calmly. "I've compensated Mr. Kaplan generously for the inconvenience of losing a server. Tonight, you are my guest, not my waitress." Alarm bells rang in my head. This wasn't normal. Customers didn't buy out servers, no matter how wealthy they were. I took a step back toward the door. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Volkov, but I should get back to my other tables." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "Sophia," he said, his voice still gentle but with an undercurrent of steel. "I am not in the habit of being refused. Please, sit. We're simply going to talk." One of his men shifted slightly, moving between me and the door. It wasn't an overt threat, but the message was clear. Leaving wasn't really an option. Slowly, reluctantly, I moved to the chair he'd indicated and sat down, perched on the edge like a bird ready to take flight at the first sign of danger. Volkov smiled, seemingly satisfied, and retook his own seat. "Wine?" he offered, reaching for the bottle, a vintage I knew cost more than I made in a month. "No, thank you. You don't drink?" "Not while working," I replied, though technically, according to him, I wasn't working anymore. He seemed amused by my resistance. "Water, then." He gestured, and one of his men immediately filled the crystal goblet before me. "Why am I here, Mr. Volkov?" I asked, deciding directness was my best approach. He took a sip of his wine, regarding me thoughtfully over the rim of his glass. "I was intrigued by our conversation yesterday. It's rare to find someone who speaks Russian with such native fluency, particularly someone working in a restaurant." "My mother taught me," I said cautiously. "She's from Moscow." "Yes, you mentioned that." He set down his glass. "Petrov is not a common surname in Moscow." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't told him my last name. "How do you know my surname?" His smile was almost apologetic. "I make it my business to know things, Sofia Andreevna Petrov. 26 years old. Graduate of State University with degrees in comparative literature and linguistics. Only child of Irina Mikhailovna Petrov, formerly of Moscow. Currently residing at 1247 Lakeside Avenue, apartment 3C. Driving a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and in desperate need of a new transmission." He paused, studying my reaction. Should I continue? Fear congealed in my stomach like lead. He'd investigated me, thoroughly, in less than 24 hours. "Why?" I whispered. He leaned forward, those gray eyes intense in the candlelight. "Because you interest me, Sophia, and because I never leave anything to chance." Before I could respond, the door opened, and servers entered with our first course. Delicate plates of seared scallops that I knew weren't on the regular menu. I sat in stunned silence as they arranged the food and departed, leaving us alone again with Volkov's ever-present security. "Eat," he encouraged, gesturing to my plate. The chef has outdone himself tonight. I couldn't imagine eating anything, but I picked up my fork and pushed a scallop around the plate, trying to gather my thoughts. Volkov knew everything about me, where I lived, what I drove, my education, my mother. The vulnerability of it was terrifying. "What do you want from me?" I finally asked, setting down my fork. He considered me for a moment, his head tilted slightly to one side. "Direct." "I appreciate that." He took another sip of his wine. "Initially, I was curious about your Russian connection. In my experience, Americans rarely speak our language with such perfection unless they have specific reasons." "You thought I was what? A spy?" I couldn't help the incredulous laugh that escaped me. "I'm a waitress with an immigrant mother and too many medical bills. That's it." Something flickered in his eyes, a hint of sympathy perhaps, though it was quickly masked. "And yet, you're educated, intelligent, and clearly capable of much more." It seemed an anomaly worth investigating. "And now that you've investigated me, followed me, researched my life," I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Are you satisfied that I'm just a nobody trying to survive?" "You are many things, Sofia Andreevna," he replied softly. "But nobody is not one of them." The intensity of his gaze made me look away. Outside the window, rain streaked down the glass, distorting the lights of the city beyond. I felt trapped, not just in this room with this dangerous man, but in the larger prison of my circumstances, my mother's illness, our mounting debts, the grinding exhaustion of working to stay barely afloat. "I have a proposition for you," Volkov said, breaking the silence. My head snapped up, alarm coursing through me. "I'm not interested in any proposition." His lips quirked in amusement. "You haven't heard it yet." "I don't need to," I replied, finding courage in desperation. "Whatever it is, the answer is no." One of his men shifted, clearly unhappy with my tone, but Volkov waved him back with a negligent hand. "I'm offering you a job, Sofia, a legitimate position as a translator and cultural liaison for my import business. The salary would be substantial, enough to pay for your mother's treatments and still live comfortably." I stared at him, waiting for the catch, the true nature of his proposition to emerge. "Why would you offer me a job? You don't know my qualifications." "I know enough," he replied. "You're educated, fluent in multiple languages, clearly intelligent and adaptable. The rest you can learn." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "And I would prefer to have you where I can see you." The last sentence sent a chill through me. What does that mean? It means I don't believe in coincidences, Sofia. A woman with your background, your particular skills, happening to serve me in a restaurant the one night I choose to dine there? He shook his head slightly. The universe rarely offers such perfect timing without purpose. "It was just chance," I insisted. "Nothing more." "Perhaps." His tone made it clear he didn't believe in chance any more than coincidence. "Regardless, the offer stands. You would start immediately, working directly for me at my offices downtown. Your mother's medical expenses would be covered entirely. The best doctors, private care, whatever she needs." The mention of my mother's care made my breath catch. It was everything I needed, everything I'd been fighting for these past 2 years, and all I had to do was work for a man who terrified me. "What exactly would this job entail?" I asked cautiously. "Translation, primarily. Documents, conversations, business communications. Occasional travel to meet with international partners." He took a bite of his scallop, chewing thoughtfully before continuing. "Nothing illegal, if that's your concern. The Volkov Group has many legitimate enterprises. And many illegitimate ones, I thought, but didn't say. Everyone in the city knew what the Volkov name was connected to, even if they spoke of it only in whispers. "I need to think about it," I said finally. Volkov's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. But don't think too long, Sofia. Opportunities like this are rare, and your mother's condition isn't improving." The casual mention of my mother's declining health sent a surge of anger through me. "You've been watching her too. I've been thorough," he replied, unrepentant. "Stage 4 breast cancer, metastasized to the bones and liver. The treatments at City General are adequate but basic. With private care, she could be much more comfortable." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Not here. Not in front of him." "You had no right." Rights, he interrupted, his voice suddenly cold, are luxuries afforded to those with power, Sophia. You have none. I am offering you some. Before I could respond, the door opened again as servers cleared our barely touched first course and brought the second, perfectly seared duck breast with a cherry reduction. I sat in silence, my appetite completely gone, as they arranged the plates and departed. You look pale, Volkov observed once we were alone again. Perhaps some wine would help after all. Without waiting for my response, he gestured, and one of his men stepped forward to pour ruby-red liquid into my glass. I didn't touch it. I should get back to work, I said, starting to rise. Sit down, Sophia. His tone brooked no argument, and I found myself sinking back into my chair. We haven't finished our conversation. I think we have, I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. You've investigated me, intimidated me, and made me an offer I don't want. There's nothing left to discuss. For a moment, his expression darkened dangerously. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. A genuine sound of amusement that transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him appear almost approachable. You have spirit, he said, approval warming his tone. That's good. I have no use for sycophants and yes-men. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, sliding it across the table to me. Take this. When you're ready to accept my offer, and you will accept it, Sophia, call this number. Anytime, day or night. I didn't take the card. And if I don't call? His smile remained, but his eyes grew cold again. Then we will have another conversation, and you may find my terms less generous. The threat hung in the air between us, unspoken, but unmistakable. I fought to keep my breathing steady, to not show the fear that clawed at my throat. May I go now? I asked, proud that my voice remained even. Volkov studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. For tonight. But remember, Sophia, I found you once by chance. Finding you again would be by design. He pushed the business card closer to me. Take it. With trembling fingers, I picked up the card. Heavy cardstock with embossed lettering, just a name and a phone number. I slipped it into my pocket and stood. Do svidania, Mr. Volkov, I said, managing a small act of defiance by using the more formal farewell rather than his casual do vstrechi from the night before. His lips quirked in that half-smile that never reached his eyes. Do vstrechi, Sofia Andreevna. Sooner rather than later, I hope. I turned and walked from the room, feeling his gaze on my back like a physical touch. Outside, in the hallway, I leaned against the wall, drawing deep breaths into lungs that suddenly seemed too small. The card in my pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric, branding my skin. Mr. Kaplan appeared at my elbow, his face anxious. Is everything all right? Did something go wrong? I straightened, forcing my professional mask back into place. Everything's fine. Mr. Volkov wanted to discuss a potential job opportunity. Kaplan's eyebrows shot up. A job? With the Volkov Group? He let out a low whistle. Sophia, do you know what some people would give for that kind of connection? Their lives, probably, I thought grimly. Their souls, certainly. I need to get back to my tables, I said, brushing past him. Actually, Kaplan called after me. Mr. Volkov paid for your entire shift. You're free to go home if you'd like. Of course he had. Another demonstration of his power, his ability to rearrange my life without my consent. I changed quickly in the staff room, avoiding the curious glances of my coworkers, and hurried to my car. The taped window that Volkov had mentioned leaked slightly in the rain, a steady drip, drip, drip that matched the pounding of my heart. As I drove home through the wet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that those steel-gray eyes were still watching me, evaluating, waiting for my inevitable surrender, because that's what it would be if I called that number. Surrender. And yet, as I thought of my mother's pale face, of the mountain of medical bills, of her deteriorating condition, was it surrender if it saved her life? The business card seemed to pulse in my pocket like a second heartbeat, a constant reminder of the devil's bargain I'd been offered. A bargain that, despite my fear and my pride, I wasn't sure I could afford to refuse. Home was quiet when I arrived, the only light coming from beneath my mother's bedroom door. I moved silently through our small apartment, not wanting to wake her if she'd managed to find sleep. The business card in my pocket felt heavy, like a stone weighing me down. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror, pale face, dark circles under my eyes, hair falling loose from its once neat bun. I hardly recognized myself anymore. 2 years of watching my mother fade away, of working double shifts and pinching pennies, had hollowed me out. I removed the card from my pocket and studied it. Simple, elegant, powerful, just like the man himself. No flashy logo or unnecessary information, just his name and a phone number embossed in silver on heavy black cardstock. I propped it against the bathroom mirror, a constant reminder of the choice before me. A soft cough from my mother's room drew my attention. I quickly changed into comfortable clothes and went to check on her. She was awake, propped up on pillows, a book open on her lap, though I doubted she'd been reading. The light cast shadows on her gaunt face, emphasizing the sharp angles of her cheekbones where fullness had once been. "You're home early," she observed, her voice raspy. "Everything okay at work?" I sat on the edge of her bed, taking her thin hand in mine. "Fine." It was just a slow night. The lie came easily. I'd become practiced at shielding her from my troubles. Her eyes, still sharp despite her illness, studied my face. "Something's bothering you, Dochenka. I can tell." For a moment, I considered telling her everything about Volkov, his offer, the terrifying way he'd researched our lives. But what good would it do? She was already carrying too heavy a burden. "Just tired," I assured her. "How are you feeling? Did you eat the soup I left for you?" "A little." Her fingers tightened weakly around mine. "Sophia, you work too hard. I worry about you." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mama. Really. You should rest now." She didn't believe me. I could see it in her eyes, but she was too exhausted to press further. I helped her take her evening medications, adjusted her pillows, and sat with her until her breathing evened out in sleep. Back in my own room, I pulled out the stack of medical bills I'd been avoiding. The numbers blurred before my eyes, impossibly large. Even with insurance, the copays and deductibles were drowning us. The experimental treatment her doctor had suggested, the one that might actually help, wasn't covered at all. Volkov's words echoed in my mind. "The treatments at City General are adequate but basic. With private care, she could be much more comfortable. More than comfortable. She could have a fighting chance. With the kind of money Volkov was offering, we could afford the experimental treatment, private nursing care, anything she needed. All I had to do was call that number." I pulled out my phone, staring at it until the screen dimmed, then went dark. Was I really considering this? Working for a man who was almost certainly involved in illegal activities? A man who had investigated me, intimidated me, and all but threatened me if I refused? Yes. For my mother, I was. But not tonight. Tonight, I needed to think, to consider my options, if I even had any. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my window, and my alarm was blaring. I dragged myself out of bed, feeling as though I hadn't slept at all. As I made coffee, I checked on my mother. She was still sleeping, her breathing shallow but steady. I left her medications and a glass of water on her bedside table, wrote a quick note explaining I'd gone to the pharmacy, and slipped out. The morning was bright and clear, the rain from the previous night having washed everything clean. I drove to the pharmacy with my windows down, trying to clear my head with fresh air. The pharmacist's face was sympathetic, but firm as she explained that our insurance was declining to cover one of my mother's medications. A pill that cost nearly $40 each, needed twice daily. "I'm sorry, Ms. Petrov," she said, sliding the prescription back across the counter. "There's nothing I can do. You could try applying for the manufacturer's assistance program, but that takes weeks to process." I nodded numbly, gathering the medications that were covered and leaving the crucial one behind. Another impossible choice in a long series of them. When I returned to our apartment building, I noticed an unfamiliar black SUV parked across the street. Its windows were tinted dark, making it impossible to see inside. But I felt eyes watching me as I hurried inside. Volkov's men? It seemed likely. My mother was awake when I entered, sitting up in bed and looking through old photographs. Her favorite way to pass time when she had the energy. "I got most of your prescriptions," I told her, unpacking the pharmacy bag. "The Taxiltin isn't covered anymore. I'll call the doctor and see if there's an alternative." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. We both knew there wasn't an equivalent alternative. It was that medication or nothing. "Sophia," she said after a moment, "there's something I need to tell you, something I should have told you long ago." I sat beside her on the bed, alarmed by the serious tone of her voice. "What is it, Mama?" she sighed, setting aside the photographs. "You asked me yesterday if I knew Alexei Volkov. I wasn't entirely truthful with you." She paused, gathering her strength. "I knew his father, Mikhail Volkov, many years ago in Moscow, before I met your father." I stared at her, trying to process this information. "You knew Volkov's father? How?" "Moscow was different then, during the final years of the Soviet Union. Everything was changing, power shifting hands." She looked down at her thin hands. "Mikhail was ambitious, dangerous, but charming. I worked as a translator at a government office, and he had business there often." "Were you involved with him?" I asked hesitantly. She shook her head. "Not in the way you're thinking. But I did translate for some of his more sensitive meetings. I knew things. Information that powerful people wouldn't want shared." A chill ran down my spine. "Is that why we left Russia?" "Partly." Her eyes took on a faraway look. "When I met your father and decided to leave with him, Mikhail wasn't pleased. He considered me valuable to his operations." "Did he threaten you?" "Not explicitly. Mikhail was too sophisticated for that." She reached for my hand. "Sophia, if his son is anything like him, he's not someone you want to know. These men, they don't see people, only assets or obstacles." I swallowed hard, wondering how much to tell her. "He offered me a job," I finally admitted, "as a translator." Her fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. "Don't take it. Whatever he's offering, it's not worth the price you'll pay. The money would cover your treatments, Mama. All of them. The experimental one, too." Tears filled her eyes. "Not at that cost, Dochenka. I won't have you sell your soul to save my life." I wanted to argue, to tell her that my soul was a small price to pay for her survival, but a coughing fit overtook her. I helped her drink some water, adjusted her oxygen, and waited until she caught her breath. "Rest now," I urged, tucking the blankets around her thin shoulders. "We can talk more later." She closed her eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. I sat with her until her breathing steadied, then quietly left the room. In the kitchen, I stared at Volkov's business card on the counter where I'd left it. My mother's warnings echoed in my head, but so did the pharmacist's words. There's nothing I can do. There was something I could do. One phone call, and our financial problems would vanish. My mother could get the treatment she needed. The medications insurance wouldn't cover, but at what cost? I picked up my phone and the card, my finger hovering over the keypad. Before I could decide, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. My heart hammered against my ribs as I answered. "Sophia Andreevna." Volkov's voice was unmistakable, even through the phone. "I trust you slept well?" I moved to the window, peering out at the black SUV still parked across the street. "You're having me watched. A precaution," he replied, unapologetic. "Have you considered my offer?" I gripped the phone tighter. "My mother needs medication that insurance won't cover. It's $40 per pill, twice daily." There was a pause, then, "Is that a yes, Sophia?" "It's a negotiation," I replied, surprising myself with my boldness. "I want to know exactly what this job entails before I agree to anything." He chuckled, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. "I admire your spirit. Very well. A car will pick you up in 1 hour to bring you to my office. We'll discuss the details in person." "I can't leave my mother alone that long. Your mother will be fine for a few hours," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. 1 hour, Sophia. Be ready." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone in my hand, wondering if I'd just made a terrible mistake. Exactly 1 hour later, a sleek black car pulled up outside our apartment building. Not the SUV that had been watching the place, but a luxury sedan with tinted windows. I'd spent the intervening time checking on my mother, who had fallen into a fitful sleep, leaving her detailed instructions and emergency contacts in case she woke before I returned. The driver opened the door for me without speaking. As I slid into the back seat, I was surprised to find I wasn't alone. Ms. Petrov, a woman perhaps 10 years my senior, greeted me with a professional nod. She was immaculately dressed in a tailored gray suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. "I'm Natalia Sokolova, Mr. Volkov's executive assistant." "Where are we going?" I asked, watching my neighborhood recede through the window as the car pulled away. "Mr. Volkov's downtown office," she replied, her accent a polished version of Russian-influenced English. "He's looking forward to meeting with you." We rode in silence after that, the car gliding through city streets toward the gleaming towers of the business district. I'd rarely had reason to visit this part of the city. It belonged to a different world than mine, one of corporate power and old money. The car pulled into an underground parking garage beneath one of the tallest buildings, 50 stories of glass and steel with the Volkov Group logo discreetly displayed at the top. Natalia led me to a private elevator that required both a keycard and fingerprint scan to operate. "Mr. Volkov values his privacy," she explained, catching my surprised look. "Security is a priority." The elevator ascended swiftly to the 49th floor, opening directly into a reception area decorated in understated luxury. Leather furniture, abstract artwork, plush carpeting that muffled our footsteps. A receptionist nodded to Natalia, who led me down a hallway to a set of imposing double doors. She knocked once, then opened the door without waiting for a response. "Ms. Petrov is here, sir." Alexei Volkov stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows that made up the far wall of his office, hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the city spread below him. He turned as we entered, those gray eyes finding mine immediately. "Sophia," he greeted me, as if we were old friends rather than predator and prey. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit." He gestured to a seating area with leather armchairs arranged around a low table. "Natalia, bring us tea." I perched on the edge of one of the armchairs, taking in the space around me. The office was large but not ostentatious, furnished with obvious quality but restrained taste. One wall held bookshelves filled with volumes in multiple languages. Another displayed a collection of what appeared to be antique maps. There were no family photographs, no personal touches that I could see. "Your mother's medication has been arranged," Volkov said without preamble, taking the seat across from me. "A 6-month supply of Taxeltin will be delivered to your apartment this afternoon, along with the rest of her prescriptions." I stared at him, caught off guard. "How did you know which—" "As I said, I'm thorough," he interrupted smoothly. "I also took the liberty of scheduling a consultation with Dr. Erickson at the Northside Medical Center regarding the experimental treatment your mother's oncologist suggested. He's the leading specialist in this particular therapy." A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Gratitude, resentment, hope, suspicion. "Why are you doing this? I haven't agreed to work for you yet. Consider it a good faith gesture," he replied, watching me carefully, "and a demonstration of what I can offer." Natalia returned with a tea service, setting it on the table between us before departing silently, closing the door behind her. Volkov poured tea into delicate porcelain cups, the domestic gesture incongruous coming from a man of his reputation. "Now, to business. You wanted to know exactly what this position would entail." I accepted the cup he offered, more for something to do with my hands than from any desire to drink. "Yes. The Volkov Group has extensive international holdings," he explained, leaning back in his chair. "Energy, shipping, real estate, technology. We deal with partners who speak many languages, come from many cultures. What I need is someone who can not only translate the words but understand the nuances, the cultural context." "A cultural liaison," I said, echoing his words from last night. He nodded, pleased. "Exactly. You would attend meetings with me, translate documents, occasionally travel to meet with partners who might be more comfortable speaking their native language. And what about your other businesses?" I asked pointedly. "The ones that don't appear in annual reports?" His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "You would not be involved in those aspects of my organization. Your position would be entirely legitimate, with appropriate tax documentation, benefits, and so forth. Plausible deniability," I murmured. That earned me a small smile. You're intelligent, Sophia. I value that. He set down his cup. The salary would be $150,000 annually, with full health benefits that would, of course, extend to your mother as a dependent. All her medical expenses would be covered, including experimental treatments, not typically covered by insurance. The figure made me dizzy. It was more than 5 times what I currently earned. With that kind of money, I could not only pay for my mother's treatments, but also move us to a better apartment, possibly even buy a house. I could pay off my student loans, replace my dying car. What's the catch? I asked, knowing there had to be one. Volkov studied me for a moment. Loyalty, he finally said. Absolute discretion about anything you see or hear while in my employ. And availability when I need you, regardless of the hour or day. Availability for what, exactly? Work, Sophia, he replied, a hint of amusement in his tone. What did you think I meant? I flushed, looking away. You're not exactly known for running a conventional business, Mr. Volkov. Alexei, he corrected. If you're going to work closely with me, we should dispense with formalities. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I won't lie to you, Sophia. My organization operates in gray areas sometimes, but your role would be legitimate, and I would never ask you to do anything illegal. I wanted to believe him. The offer was everything I needed. Everything my mother needed. But my mother's warning echoed in my mind. These men don't see people, only assets or obstacles. I need time to think, I said, setting down my untouched tea. Of course, he agreed, though I detected impatience beneath his polite tone. But not too much time. I need someone in this position immediately. He stood, and I automatically rose as well. We were standing closer than I'd realized. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his gaze. This near, I could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive, and see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the only indication that he was closer to 50 than 40. 1 week, he said, his voice lowered. I'll give you 1 week to decide, Sophia. After that, I'll need to find someone else. It was more time than I'd expected him to offer, given his obvious impatience. Thank you. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek in a touch so light I might have imagined it. Don't thank me yet. You haven't said yes. I stepped back, unsettled by his touch and my body's unbidden response to it. I should get back to my mother, he nodded, making no move to stop me. Natalia will see you out. The car will take you home. He returned to his desk, effectively dismissing me. 1 week, Sophia. The offer expires after that. Outside, in the hallway, I drew a shaky breath. Natalia appeared almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. This way, Miss Petrov, she said, leading me back to the elevator. As we descended, I gathered my courage to ask her the question burning in my mind. How long have you worked for Mr. Volkov? She glanced at me, her expression unreadable. 12 years. And is he a good employer? A faint smile touched her lips. He is fair, generous with those who are loyal, and unforgiving of mistakes. If you're looking for conventional, Miss Petrov, you should look elsewhere. I'm looking for a way to save my mother, I admitted quietly. Her expression softened slightly. Then you found it. Mr. Volkov rewards loyalty, and he keeps his promises, good and bad. The car was waiting when we reached the garage. As I settled into the back seat, Natalia leaned in to give me a small card, not a business card this time, but what appeared to be an appointment card from a medical office. Your mother's consultation with Dr. Erickson, she explained. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., the car will pick you both up at 9:15. I stared at the card in disbelief. He already scheduled it. Natalia's smile was knowing. Mr. Volkov expects you to accept his offer, Ms. Petrov. He's simply expediting matters. As the car pulled away, I leaned back against the leather seat, trying to sort through the whirlwind of the past hour. Volkov had moved with frightening efficiency, identifying my mother's medication, scheduling a specialist consultation, laying out a future that addressed every one of my immediate concerns, and all before I'd even accepted the position. By the time I arrived home, I was exhausted from the emotional roller coaster. When I opened the apartment door, I was surprised to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, more alert than I'd seen her in days. "Mama? You shouldn't be up," I said, hurrying to her side. She waved away my concern. "I'm feeling better today." Her gaze was sharp as she studied my face. "Where were you, Sophia?" I hesitated, torn between honesty and the desire to protect her. "I went to meet with Alexei Volkov about the job he offered." Instead of the alarm I expected, she simply nodded. "I thought as much." "And what did he offer you?" I sat across from her, laying out everything Volkov had said. The salary, the benefits, the nature of the position. I left out his touch, the unsettling effect he had on me. "A cultural liaison," she repeated when I'd finished. "That's what they called me too, at first." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean?" She sighed, suddenly looking all her years and more. "Sophia, before you make any decision, there's something you need to know. Something about your father, your real father." My heart stopped, then resumed at double speed. "What do you mean, my real father?" "You said my father was an American professor you met in Moscow." My mother reached for my hand across the table, her thin fingers surprisingly strong. "That was a story I created to protect you, and myself. Your biological father was Mikhail Volkov." The room seemed to tilt around me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself, trying to process this impossible revelation. "Mikhail Volkov? Alexei's father?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving my face. "We were involved briefly before I fled Russia. He didn't know I was pregnant when I left. I made sure of that." "But why?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and hollow. "Why lie all these years?" "Because Mikhail was a dangerous man, Sophia. The things he did, the people he hurt." She shook her head. "I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up in that world, and I was terrified that if he found out about you, he would take you from me." My mind raced, trying to fit this new information into the narrative of my life. "So Alexei Volkov is my half-brother?" "Yes." My mother's face was etched with worry. "And the fact that he's found you now after all these years. It can't be coincidence, Sophia. He must know, or at least suspect." The strange intensity of his interest in me, the way he'd investigated my background so thoroughly, it suddenly made a terrible kind of sense. Not just a random waitress who happened to speak Russian, but his own blood. "Why would he offer me a job instead of just telling me the truth?" I asked, still struggling to accept this bombshell. "Perhaps he wants to be certain first." My mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Or perhaps he wants to see what kind of person you are before deciding whether to acknowledge you." A harsh laugh escaped me. "Acknowledge me? I don't want or need his acknowledgement. I've lived my entire life without the Volkov name, and I've done just fine." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Sophia. I thought I was protecting you. I never imagined he would find us after all this time." Before I could respond, a sharp knock sounded at our door. I tensed, immediately thinking of Volkov's men. My mother squeezed my hand, fear evident in her face. When I opened the door, I found a courier holding a large package and a clipboard. "Delivery for Irina Petrov," he announced, barely glancing at me. I signed for the package and brought it inside, already guessing what it contained. Sure enough, when I opened it, I found a 6-month supply of Taxiltin, along with all my mother's other medications, just as Volkov had promised. At the bottom of the box was a small envelope with my name written in elegant handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a note, a gesture of good faith between family. AV. He knew. He'd known all along. I sank into a chair, the note dangling from my fingers. My mother watched me, her face pale with concern. "He knows," I said simply, handing her the note. She read it, then closed her eyes briefly. "What will you do now, Sophia?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since Volkov first appeared in my life, but now it carried infinitely more weight. This wasn't just about a job offer anymore. It was about identity, family, truth. I need to talk to him, I decided. I need to hear what he has to say. My mother nodded slowly. "I understand. But be careful, Dochenka. The Volkov men are masters of manipulation. Don't let him rewrite your story." I helped her take her evening medication, including the Taxelton that we could never have afforded on our own, then settled her back in bed. As I sat beside her, watching her drift into a more peaceful sleep than she'd had in months, I made my decision. The next morning, I called the number on Volkov's business card. Natalia answered, her voice professionally neutral. "I need to see him," I said without preamble. "Today." There was a brief pause. "Mr. Volkov is in meetings until 4 p.m. He can see you at 4:30. I'll be there." The day passed in a blur of preparation. I took my mother to her consultation with Dr. Erickson, as arranged. The specialist was cautiously optimistic about the experimental treatment, explaining that while it wasn't a cure, it could significantly extend her life and improve its quality. He'd already received authorization for the treatment, courtesy of Volkov, no doubt, and could begin as early as next week. I watched my mother's face brighten with the first real hope she'd felt in years, and my resolve strengthened. Whatever game Volkov was playing, whatever his motives, he'd given my mother this chance. For that alone, I owed him a conversation. At 4:25 p.m., I stood outside the Volkov Group headquarters, gathering my courage. I'd dressed with care, not in my waitress uniform or casual clothes, but in the best outfit I owned. A simple navy dress that had once belonged to my mother in better days. I wanted to face him as an equal, not a supplicant. Natalia was waiting when I stepped off the elevator on the 49th floor. "He's expecting you," she said, leading me toward Volkov's office. This time, he wasn't standing at the window when I entered. He sat behind his desk, reading through a document with focused attention. He looked up as the door closed behind me, setting aside his work and rising. "Sophia," he greeted me, his expression carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." "You knew," I said without preamble. "All along, you knew who I was." He gestured to the seating area. "Please, sit. This isn't a conversation to have standing." I remained where I was. "Answer me. Did you know I'm your half-sister when you came to the restaurant that night?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I suspected. You have his eyes, our father's eyes. And your Russian was too perfect. Your mother's name too familiar. So ordering vodka in Russian was what? A test?" A faint smile touched his lips. "A fishing expedition, let's say. Your response confirmed my suspicions." I finally moved to the seating area, sinking into one of the leather chairs. My legs felt suddenly unsteady. Volkov followed, taking the seat across from me. "How long have you known about me?" I asked. "I've been searching for you for years," he admitted. "After our father died 5 years ago, I found some old correspondence that suggested your mother might have been pregnant when she fled Russia. It was just a hint, a note from an informant who'd seen her at a doctor's appointment, but it was enough to make me wonder if I had a sibling somewhere. And now that you've found me, what do you want?" He leaned forward, his gray eyes, our father's eyes apparently, intense. "Family, Sophia. You're a Volkov, whether you use the name or not. Blood matters." "Does it?" I challenged. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he countered. "You're intelligent, educated, fiercely loyal to your mother. You work yourself to exhaustion rather than compromise your principles. You speak perfect Russian and can stand up to me without flinching." A genuine smile spread across his face. "You're very much a Volkov." The comparison both unsettled and oddly pleased me, which only unsettled me more. "I grew up without your father, without our father. I don't need a family now, especially not one connected to—" I gestured vaguely, encompassing his empire. "Connected to crime," he finished bluntly. "Not all of my businesses operate in the shadows, Sophia. The offer I made you was genuine, a legitimate position with legitimate work, but with strings attached, of course." He didn't bother to deny it. Everything in life has strings. "The question is whether you can accept the ones I'm offering." I studied him. This man who was my half-brother, trying to see past the powerful exterior to whatever lay beneath. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth from the beginning? Would you have believed me?" he asked reasonably. "Or would you have thought it was some elaborate manipulation?" He had a point. I would have dismissed such a claim outright. "So instead you investigated me, intimidated me, and offered me a job with suspiciously perfect terms. I needed to know what kind of person you are," he said unapologetically. "And yes, I wanted to help you and your mother. Our father may never have known about you, but I do. That makes you my responsibility." I bristled at that. "I'm not your responsibility or your obligation. I've taken care of myself and my mother for years." "At what cost?" he asked quietly. "Working double shifts, living in that tiny apartment, watching her suffer because you can't afford better care?" He shook his head. "That ends now, Sophia. Whether you take the job or not, your mother's medical expenses are covered." "That's not negotiable." Tears pricked at my eyes, which only frustrated me more. I didn't want to feel grateful to him. "Why? You don't even know her." "She gave me a sister," he replied simply. "That's enough." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything between us. Blood, history, secrets, almost tangible in the air. "I'll take the job," I finally said, "but I have conditions." One of his eyebrows arched in surprise, then amusement. "You're negotiating with me?" Bold. "My conditions are simple," I continued, ignoring his comment. "I want a contract that clearly outlines my responsibilities and limitations. I won't be involved in anything illegal, even peripherally. I want my mother to have the best medical care possible, and I want the truth, all of it, about our father and why my mother really fled Russia." Volkov studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed, a genuine sound of appreciation. "You really are a Volkov," he said, shaking his head. "Done. All of it." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, I took it. His grip was firm, his skin warm against mine. For the first time, I looked for similarities between us. The shape of our hands, the line of our brows, the set of our jaws. Little pieces of shared heritage I'd never known to look for before. "Welcome to the family, Sofia Andreevna Volkov," he said formally. "We have much to discuss." 3 months later, I stood at the window of my mother's new bedroom, watching the sunset over the city from our penthouse apartment. The experimental treatment was working better than Dr. Erickson had dared to hope. Her latest scans showed the cancer retreating, her strength returning day by day. Behind me, I heard the door open. "Sophia," my mother called, her voice stronger than it had been in years. "Alexei is here for dinner." I turned, smiling at her. She looked almost like her old self again, her hair growing back in silver wisps, her face filling out as she regained weight. She still moved carefully, but the constant pain that had been her companion for so long had finally begun to ease. "I'll be right there," I promised. As I joined them in the dining room, I caught Alexei watching me with that assessing gaze that I'd come to recognize as concern rather than calculation. Working with him these past months had been a revelation. He was demanding but fair, brilliant but willing to listen, ruthless in business, but unexpectedly gentle with family. Family. Such a simple word for such a complicated reality. "How was Geneva?" I asked, taking my seat at the table. I'd opted out of the trip, staying behind to oversee my mother's treatments. "Productive," he replied. The Swiss were reluctant at first, but they came around to our proposal. Your translation of the contract terms was instrumental. They appreciated the cultural sensitivity. I nodded, accepting the compliment with a small smile. The work was challenging but fulfilling, utilizing all my education and skills in ways I'd never imagined possible. And if I occasionally glimpsed the shadowy side of the Volkov Empire, I kept my promise to remain separate from it. "Sophia has been working too hard," my mother observed, giving Alexei a pointed look. "She needs a break." He chuckled. "Tell her, not me. She refuses every vacation I suggest." I rolled my eyes at both of them. "I'm sitting right here, you know." Their shared laughter warmed something inside me that had been cold for too long. This strange, unexpected family we'd created wasn't perfect. There were still secrets, still shadows, still adjustments to be made, but it was ours. Later, as Alexei prepared to leave, he paused beside me in the foyer. "Are you happy, Sophia?" he asked quietly, the question startling in its directness. I considered it honestly. "I'm content," I finally said. "My mother is getting better. The work is good. The rest..." I shrugged. He nodded, understanding what I didn't say. The rest would take time. Trust, Genuine connection. The weight of our shared blood balanced against the years of separation. Du vstrechi, Sophia, he said, the familiar farewell no longer sounding like a threat, but a promise. Du vstrechi, Alexei, I replied, watching as he disappeared into the elevator, flanked as always by his security. I closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. 3 months ago, I'd been a waitress with a dying mother and mounting debts. Now I was Sofia Andreevna Volkov, with a powerful half-brother, a mother on the mend, and a future I could never have imagined. All because Alexei Volkov had ordered vodka in Russian, and I had answered in kind. Life turns on such small moments. A shared language, a fleeting recognition. Blood calling to blood across decades of silence. I didn't know what the future held for this newfound family of ours, with its complicated history and complex present. But for the first time in years, I was eager to find out.